Hello everybody. If you want to read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you. Short story 600, The Misplaced Medallion, words with a silent P, intermediate. A story incorporating words which are pronounced with a silent P. Detective Inspector Arthur Finch believed in facts, not feelings. He studied psychology at university, convinced that the answers to all crimes lay in the human mind, not in destiny or curses. This is why he was so annoyed to be called to the home of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who claimed a rival psychic had stolen her most treasured possession. "He came in a dream, Inspector, Mrs. Vance said in a frail voice. She was still recovering from a bout of pneumonia and her thin hands trembled as she gestured towards an empty mahogany shelf. "He told me the light will be taken and the truth will be hidden in the stone. The medallion is gone." Arthur sighed inwardly, his eyes scanning the room. The air was thick with the scent of old books and lavender. There was a small, dusty lectern in the corner, with an open book on it. It looked like a very old Bible. A thin scrap of paper lay beside it, printed with the first few lines of a psalm. "And you sure you haven't just misplaced it, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, trying to sound patient. "You mentioned you had a receipt for the medallion. Is that also missing?" "Of course. It was with the medallion, in the little box in the cupboard." "I am not an old fool, Inspector," she replied indignantly. Arthur had to admit, the case seemed strange. Mrs. Vance had a reputation for being eccentrically wealthy but sharp-witted. He dismissed the psychic's dream clue and instead focused on the physical evidence. He examined the shelf where the medallion had sat. There were no marks, no fingerprints, no sign of forced entry. He then turned his attention to the cupboard. It was a beautiful piece, but the handle seemed slightly loose. He opened the cupboard and looked inside. It was empty. Mrs. Vance's face fell. He reached inside and felt around, and his fingers brushed against a loose panel at the back. It was a hidden compartment. Gently, he pulled the panel away, revealing a small, velvet box. Inside, nestled on a silken pillow, was the golden medallion. Next to it was the missing receipt and a few more pages from Mrs. Vance's old book of Psalms. Arthur held them out to her. Her eyes went wide with a mix of surprise and embarrassment. "Oh, my word," she whispered, a faint blush appearing on her pale cheeks. I remember now. After the fever, I hid them away. I must have been confused." Arthur smiled. "A matter of simple human psychology, Mrs. Vance. Not a crime at all." He left Mrs. Vance's home feeling satisfied. The case was closed, not by dreams or mysterious visions, but by logic and a little bit of common sense. Vocabulary notes. Frail. Meaning, physically weak and delicate. It often describes someone who is old or unwell. From the story, "He came in a dream, Inspector, Mrs. Vance said in a frail voice." Similar words: weak, delicate, fragile. Example sentence: "The old man was too frail to carry his own luggage." Indignantly. Meaning, feeling or showing anger or annoyance at what is perceived as unfair treatment. From the story, "I am not an old fool, Inspector," she replied indignantly. Similar words: angrily, resentfully, huffily. Example sentence: "That's not fair," he said indignantly when he was accused of cheating. Eccentrically. Meaning, in a way that is unconventional, strange, or slightly odd. From the story, Mrs. Vance had a reputation for being eccentrically wealthy but sharp-witted. Similar words: unusually, strangely, oddly. Example sentence: the artist dressed eccentrically, often wearing a bright purple suit and a top hat. Witted. Meaning, having a particular kind of intelligence or wit. It is often used as part of a compound word, like sharp-witted. From the story, Mrs. Vance had a reputation for being eccentrically wealthy but sharp-witted. Similar words: clever, intelligent, smart. Example sentence: the detective was quick-witted and solved the puzzle in minutes. Conscience. Meaning, an inner feeling or voice acting as a guide to the rightness or wrongness of one's behavior. The title of the story is A Matter of Conscience. From the story, this word is not in the body of the story, but it is in the title, which suggests that Detective Finch's sense of right and wrong guides his actions, and that Mrs. Vance's mistake weighs on her conscience. Similar words: morality, scruples, integrity. Example sentence: after he took the money, his conscience bothered him so much that he returned it. Story written by Gemini Pro AI. Image created by 1minute.ai. To read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you. CC Music, Drifting at 432 Hz, Unicorn Heads.
Hey, welcome to The Explainer. So today, I've got a short mystery for you. It's a fun one that pits logic against, well, the supernatural. This case is going to test your detective skills, and along the way, it's going to show us just how easily our own minds can play tricks on us. All right, so our story kicks off with this really chilling premonition. A client, Mrs. Vance, she claims a rival psychic gave her this super cryptic message in a dream. The warning? Her most treasured possession was about to be stolen. Right away, you know this is going to be a very unusual case.
And, that psychic warning, it immediately sets up this fascinating conflict. Because this case isn't just about some missing object. No, it's a battle between two totally different ways of seeing the world.
So, on one side, you've got Detective Inspector Arthur Finch. This guy is all about facts, psychology, logic. He's convinced every crime has a rational explanation, something rooted in the human mind. And then on the other side, you've got his client, Mrs. Vance. She operates on feelings, dreams, and a deep belief in the supernatural. This clash, it's really the heart of the whole story. Okay, but what's so interesting about Mrs. Vance is that you can't just write her off, She has this reputation for being incredibly sharp-witted, even with her, let's say, eccentric beliefs. But, and this is key, she's also just getting over pneumonia. That's left her physically frail and maybe a little mentally vulnerable. And that just makes the whole situation way more complex. So how does a detective who's all about pure logic handle a case like this? Well, for Finch, these psychic predictions are just noise. He totally ignores the dream clue and focuses only on what he can actually see and touch. His process is super methodical, almost clinical, really. He starts with the shelf where the medallion was supposed to be. And nothing. No fingerprints, no sign of a break-in. So next, he moves on to the paperwork, right? The receipt. That's a solid piece of evidence. But when that leads him nowhere, his eyes land on this beautiful, kind of unassuming cupboard sitting nearby.
And Mrs. Vance, she's insisting the receipt was right there with the medallion. You can just feel her frustration in this quote, can't you? She feels like the inspector is basically doubting her sanity, and that just amps up the tension in the room.
So, with zero external clues, Finch's attention is completely fixed on that cupboard. The whole case is about to turn on what he finds or doesn't find inside. So, what do you think is going on here? Really? Is it a cunning psychic rival, like Mrs. Vance believes? Or maybe a super clever thief who left no trace? Or is the explanation something a lot simpler? And the solution has absolutely nothing to do with curses or rivals. As Finch is checking out the cupboard, his fingers brush against something unexpected way in the back, a loose panel. He's just found a hidden compartment. And inside, Everything is perfectly safe. The little velvet box, the golden medallion, the missing receipt, even a few pages from a book of Psalms. Turns out, nothing was ever stolen at all.
So Finch explains it. In her feverish state after being sick, Mrs. Vance probably hid the medallion herself for safekeeping, and then, because of all the confusion, she just forgot. It wasn't some supernatural event, it was a simple, totally understandable trick of the human mind.
You know, the way this story unfolds is almost as interesting as the solution. The author picked some really specific words to paint this picture of Mrs. Vance's state of mind. So let's break down a few of those key words and see how they brought this whole psychological mystery to life. All right, first up, Mrs. Vance is described as frail. This word immediately sets up a physical weakness, right? A kind of delicacy that's come on because of her recent illness. And you can even hear it in her voice in the story. This word is so crucial because it gives us a physical reason for her potential mental confusion. It's basically the key that unlocks the entire psychological explanation for the mystery.
Okay, next. When she feels the detective is doubting her, she doesn't just get angry. The story says she replies indignantly. And that points to a much, much deeper feeling. It's that powerful feeling of being treated unfairly, that sense of injustice. It shows us that even though she's physically frail, she's got this fierce sense of pride. And that makes her a way more complex and believable character. The story also calls her eccentrically wealthy. Now, this isn't just some random detail about her having a lot of money. What it does is it signals that she's unconventional, maybe a little strange. It helps us get why someone like her might be more open to believing in psychics and curses to begin with. It's all part of building her unique worldview. And finally, right after calling her eccentric, the story describes her as sharp-witted. And this might just be the most important clue to her entire personality, because it puts her on the same intellectual level as our quick-witted detective. This tells us the story isn't about some smart person tricking a foolish one. Not at all. It's about two very intelligent minds looking at the exact same situation in completely different ways. So when it's all said and done, what does this misplaced medallion really teach us? Well, when you put all the clues and the language together, the story becomes about something much deeper than just a simple whodunit. Ultimately, what the story is showing us is how easily our own minds can become the culprit, especially when we're affected by stress or sickness. See, memory isn't like a perfect video recording. It's more like a storyteller. And sometimes that storyteller creates these super convincing narratives that feel completely real, but they just fall apart when you look at them logically. The real villain here was never a psychic. It was just a faulty memory. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. I mean, we've all lost our keys or forgotten why we walked into a room, right? But think bigger for a second. When was the last time you were absolutely convinced of something, only to find out later that your memory had kind of made up its own story? It's a fascinating question, and it gets right to the heart of how our own minds work.